All right, welcome. So this is going to be the first in what is hopefully going to be a series of spotlights. So we're kicking things off today with our HASS and science faculty representatives. And so essentially we're going to be shining the metaphorical torch on some of our amazing student reps that are a part of these faculties. And so also I'd like to thank them for offering their time to kind of help us all out today so that we can learn a bit more about being a student rep and what that means, and then also some best practices as being a student rep as well. So general etiquette for today as well. We're more than happy for you guys to ask questions in the chat. The format for today, I'm going to introduce these guys and then they're going to go through the topics that you would have seen advertised. And then we've got Q&A as well. So we will try to slot in any questions that you guys have in and amongst those things, but don't be shy. This is definitely a collaborative space for you. As I said, we would love for you to have your videos on, but if you don't feel comfortable, that is more than okay. And also we'll try to keep mute on, off, you know, so you're not talking when you don't have something to say. But if you do, more than welcome to just chime in as well. All right. Also, I'd like to do the acknowledgement of country. So the University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. Now, whilst we're not meeting on mutual lands at the moment, I'm sure we are all sitting in different spots of Brisbane as well. So I still feel that that's particularly relevant. So we pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So here we are introducing our fantastic student reps. So they're going to be facilitating most of the session today. So first up is Critty. So Critty should have her video on as well. Yeah, here she is. So she is currently a HASS Teaching and Learning postgrad student rep for 2020. She is a panel member of the Queensland Student Advisory Board run by TIQ. She's studying a Masters of Strategic Communication and is passionate about voicing international student concerns at UQ and solving communication challenges as well. So thank you, Critty.
Thank you.
Sean is here somewhere. Can you
Hi
say
there.
hi? Thank you. So Sean has served as a student rep on 2 committees, Teaching and Learning in 2018 and the Board of Studies this year. So he's studying a Bachelor of Science majoring in physics and is in his 3rd year. For the past 12 months, he's worked in the Faculty of Sciences SLOCI, which stands for Student-Led Observations for Course Improvement Team, as the course partnerships team leader. And he's currently working with his team on a book to be published later this year on their processes as well. He is passionate about community engagement in causes that matter, science and communication, and the application of science in industry. And then finally, we have James. Can James say hello?
Hello.
Thank you. So he is currently in his final year of a PhD in organic chemistry, studying steroidal inhibitors of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. I knew I would stuff that anyways, even though I YouTubed it. In the past, he has served as a student rep on the Senate Discipline Appeals Committee, the Science Precinct T&L Planning Committee, and been the chair of the SCMB Research Students Advisory Group. He is currently a student rep for the Science, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee and the RACI Congress Planning Committee. So he's a bit of an overachiever. He is interested in pharmaceutical research as well as commercialization of science and intellectual property. So these are your student rep facilitators for today, guys. We have really tried to, I guess, have a lot of diversity within these guys that are presenting today. So bear in mind that all of your questions as well, these guys are from both domestic, international, undergrad and postgrad backgrounds. So we've really tried to cover all areas, I guess, so that you guys can get some different perspectives depending on what committees you're on and what questions you have to ask today. So that will be enough of me, I think. And so I might just hand it over to our reps now to go over the topics that we have outlined for today's presentations.
So the first topic that we'll be talking about today is all about bridging the gap from student to student representative. So what that means is so when you're becoming a student rep for the first time, how you make that transition, what are some important things to keep in mind while you're coming along to the first couple of presentations, first couple of committee meetings rather, and how you can best engage with your fellow committee members.
Cool, I'll go next. So I think what I'm predominantly going to be speaking about is going to be how do you open information and communication challenges. And that's also because in the virtual world, obviously, we really haven't been able to achieve as much as we did think we would as student reps. And, we would kind of have an engagement on campus. And we've really not had that, and be it the students or be it the staff and committee facing role as well, we've not really had that opportunity, and that will kind of continue into the next few semesters as well, where we are going to be virtual as well as on campus. And how do we just kind of open those channels for really communicating with the larger group and avoiding kind of groupthink situations. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing.
And the third topic we'll be speaking about today is being bold and sort of overcoming the anxiety and fear associated with speaking out to people who are much, much smarter than you are. So I think Sean's going to take us away with the first talk.
Sounds good. Let's do it. So the first topic we'll be talking about is all about becoming a student rep and contributing to the committee that you're now a part of. So just a bit of background on my story getting involved in student representative roles in committees within faculties and the Faculty of Science more specifically is I was only a first year when I took on the role as student rep for the Teaching and Learning Committee. So as a first year, still trying to find my way in uni, it was quite a big deal. Also trying to understand how professional committees worked within the Faculty of Science. So there's lots of hierarchies to understand. There's lots of ladders that you need to work out how to climb in order to be able to contribute your voice to a committee. You need to understand what are the appropriate ways of getting your issues that are important to you onto the agenda for the committee meeting, and also how to answer the questions of your fellow committee members as they're trying to get you engaged and get you active in the committee. So what that led me to do is with a fellow committee member, I helped to create a couple of resources, which Cal's going to pop up. Thanks, Cal. And so there were two resources that we developed over a 12-month period. The first of which was the Student Committee Member Guide. So this is a guide that's available to anyone who's interested from any faculty. We've designed it so that you can easily repurpose it to the faculty that you're from. And basically the structure of this guide, what we tried to achieve with this resource is to give you the opportunity to present your student committee members with a really simple process to follow, a really simple introduction to how committees function in a professional context, how they can best make contributions to the committee that they're a part of, and how the fellow committee members can support the new student representatives in making the most of this opportunity that they've been given and the platform that they've been provided with. So this was a student staff partnership project. So I worked with the secretary from the Teaching and Learning Committee and my fellow student committee member from Gatton, and we were able to bring together this first resource. The second resource, which is also available for repurposing in any faculty context, is we'll just jump back real quick, is the Student Committee Member Recruitment Guide. So this is a guide that I also created with the same team of amazing fellow committee members. And we were able to develop a framework for fairly selecting committee members. So we'll jump to the next slide and I'll go into the Student Committee Member Guide a little bit more. So this is a digital resource. So it's available online to assist new committee members to faculty level committee membership roles. Some of the really important deliverables we wanted to get out there was a clear and easily understandable resource which stands as both a method of introduction and a useful handbook for the duration of a student's tenure in the role. So not only do we want to introduce you to the structure of a committee, we also want to introduce you to the way the committee functions and some interesting points that might come up during your tenureship. We also wanted to produce a resource that can be easily adapted, as I mentioned before, And we wanted the development of awareness within the Faculty of Science for student members. Sometimes student members on faculty committees can be tricky to engage at the start when you're trying to understand how a student fits into the context of your own committee. So this guide really supports that process. And the next guide, which I'll briefly speak on, is all about student committee member recruitment. So there were 3 key points we wanted to drive home with this guide, which was recruitment, selection, and induction. So we wanted to make sure the criteria for selecting student reps was fair. We wanted to make sure that the induction process was also one that was engaging and enabled the student rep to get to know their fellow committee members right from the beginning. So yeah, that was the really core aim of the development of those 2 resources. I suppose a final point that I just wanted to discuss in terms of student committee membership and being a student rep is during that transition process, it can be really difficult to understand, because the committees might have been working together for a couple of years, even in some situations. And so trying to integrate yourself into that environment could be quite difficult, especially if you're only in 1st or 2nd year and you're also still trying to understand how the university works on a professional level. So really my one piece of advice is just jump in. Like, you need to get involved with your fellow committee members, have open discussions with them, because all of them want to hear your advice. They're really interested in what you have to say. And I'm sure Kriti and James will be able to expand on both of those points a lot more. So thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Sean. Does anyone have any questions before we move on at all for Sean? No. Okay, awesome. If you do, as I said before, feel free to pop it in the chat or just chime in at some other point, and we'll be able to answer you at some point. So now I will hand over to Kriti.
Okay, so just building on from what Sean has said, it can be really intimidating in the start. And I'm also an international student who joined last year. So I was pretty clueless about a lot of things. And how do you kind of navigate? How do you reach out to students? How do you reach out to committee members for your ideas? And how you really get somebody to really validate your ideas? Because it's not always sufficient to say, this is what I kind of think. It's sometimes really required to have like the backup data to really support your idea, and that data you can only get from like a staff member of the community. You really don't have access to it as a student. And that's, I think, where I hit like most of my kind of roadblocks, and then we decided to kind of work through them. And it was really exciting, because the moment we actually started doing some work, we were all shifted online, and essentially nobody, even the staff, didn't know how really the meetings would kind of go. So it was a really interesting phase, but it was also a really good learning, which I really think is replicable in our kind of work lives as well. So I think how we really open up the channels of the HASS TNL committee for communication. And this was I just want to say, this was definitely not me. I had 2 great undergrad student reps who really run a major part of the show. So what we all did was that one of the reps was actually handling the HASS Instagram page as well. And we decided to really understand what our HASS kind of engaged student cohort is facing. We started using Instagram polls, and we started asking them, how do you feel about your tutors? How do you feel about the mental health? How do you feel about your courses, the changes to your assignments, and everything? So whatever the committee really wanted to get input from, we actually got those questions from a couple of members of the committee that we were serving on, and we formed them into these questions, and then we put them out on HASS. So it wasn't like a very formal way of getting some data, but it was definitely like a quick and an easy way to get data from students who were already pretty engaged in HASS, and it did give them like a good bedrock of kind of information to really say what is it that that the students are really facing an issue with. And the results at times were sometimes really good, and sometimes very different from what we expected also. Like, you tend to, like, sitting at home and working on your kind of own projects or whatever, you tend to think in a certain manner, and those polls like really helped us to understand that things are very different for everybody, kind of a thing. And that was just a really easy and a good way. So if you're in a faculty and your faculty or your school has these kind of Instagram or Facebook pages, you can reach out to whoever's really managing them and really get that kind of association going, that they also kind of can promote your existence. So when you become a student rep, they can do a post and say, hey, this is your student rep for the year or for the semester, however that works. And that just gets you a little bit more validation from the larger student cohort that there is this this person, because I think a lot of times the students don't even really know that they have an outlet like this where, you know, it can be completely anonymous and informal, but, you know, there's still going to be somebody who's going to be hearing their kind of woes or whatever is working. So I mean, this is a very informal and a very good way to reach out to students, but I think most students don't know that this exists, this kind of support exists. So I think that was one really good way where we did it. The other thing that we did, which was a little challenging, was we got a blast emailer sent to all HASS students. So the undergrad the student rep sent it to all the undergrad students, and I sent it to all the postgrad students. It's never been really done before in HASS, at least for the last 15 years it's not been done, is what we were told, but it did require some sort of approvals, because UQ really manages the kind of blast emails that are sent to students. But I mean, that was the biggest validation when, you know, something from HASS really reached everybody's inbox and it had your name on it, and it said, you know, this is what I do and these are the other kind of student reps. And we also developed, and I'm just going to put it in chat if that's something that anybody wants to pursue with their teams, is we put we made like a web page of all the student reps that were in HASS, you know, which was not just our committee, but if somebody really wanted to speak to their school rep, or, you know, somebody really wanted to speak to the undergrad rep for something, this just kind of opened up the channel that, you know, this is all the support that exists. It's not like, you know, like we are not just the only person who's out there to help you. There are other kind of students who you can connect with. So it was just a really good way, and we did get a lot of emails back, and some were just like, thank you for letting us know that you exist, you know. So that was again quite it was worth the effort, that, you know, to tell people that there is this kind of student committee who can really voice your you know, opinions on a much larger scale in a very anonymous manner. And I think there's opportunity for everybody in this call, in this like Zoom meeting, who's also a continuing member for 2020, because most of orientation of semester 2 is anyways online. This is like your opportunity to maybe connect with you know, somebody in the committee who can really help you with blast emailers when somebody joins, because that's also the time that a new student would like really be looking out for, you know, where can they really get support and all of that. So it's just a good time if you have a role in which you need student input. It's just good to really get that out right at the starting of semester 2 2020. And I think the other thing that I would want to say, which is in a way communication in a little in the, I think, backhanded way or something, is that we wanted some kind of survey data. So we wrote to one, so I wrote to one of the members of the committee, and I said, you know, I really want to know what are students feeling. Have you done any survey or anything like that? And then they came back to me. So my question was, just give me some data and I'm happy to work with it. They said, we are actually kind of, you know, devising a survey. And I think everybody must be aware that there was a mid-semester survey that was done by UQ, and we kind of did that. So they said, we are devising a survey, but we've literally got no student input on that. Do you want to give your input on that survey? So we said, oh wow, like you've designed a survey and you don't know if that's what we want to talk about, but that's great. So I ended up kind of helping the team, I don't know, the UQ survey team that was really working on the survey and getting some of the questions modified to be a bit more relevant to what we were doing. So I mean, it was not in the purview of the HASS teaching and learning faculty. It was much larger than what I thought it would be, but it was a pretty good experience, because then because I was a part of that process, they're happy to share some of the data. Otherwise it would be an only kind of staff data, and staff would look at it and I don't know what the hell would they do with it at the end of it. So I mean, it's just good that you know that there are these kind of outlets which are larger than your community, which you can get involved in by asking somebody in your committee. So I just think these are some really good ways to avoid like groupthink, increase your reach, and also kind of form like a bond with somebody in the committee who will really kind of vouch for you through, you know, your various ideas, and who can kind of help you make them a little more cohesive and actionable in nature. Because every idea that we get is definitely not something that somebody would kind of, you know, validate or really want to spend a lot of time on. So it's really important to also get that kind of communication and relationship being built. And I think, yeah, that's it for me. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
In the meantime, just in case any of you are thinking of any questions as well, just further to what Kriti was saying, I think it could also be a good idea for you all, if you're happy to post the committees as well as the areas that they fall within, just in the chat. If you are having, you know, trouble connecting, perhaps we might be able to just connect a few of you now, and you might be able to work with each other to bounce resources or ideas and things like that in the future as well. So we're very aware that at the moment, obviously, given and the online climate of everything, networking events and things like that are rare to come by. So definitely I would encourage you all to, if you could post your committee as well as the area that it falls within, if it's not already obvious by the committee name, just in the chat, and we'll see if we can form some connections there as well. But if anybody doesn't have any other questions for Creedy, I might move on to James.
Thanks, Cal. All right, so
change. There we go.
Yeah. So as you can see, my presentation will be on being bold. And so from what you saw before, I've been on quite a few committees in my time. I was the chair of some of them, or held positions there. But in most of them, I was the dumbest person in the room, unfortunately. And it can be really scary sitting across from someone like Melissa Brown or other heads of school, or when the decisions you make have a huge impact. So when I was in the Discipline Appeals Committee, the decisions we made could impact people's visa status, whether they were expelled or suspended or whatever, right? And so something I've had to work on a lot through these committees is trying to be bold and trying to speak up when I have something to say, and working on the confidence to actually say those sort of things. So it starts to help to sort of outline the problem, and that's almost always feeling shy or timid. But that's not the problem in itself, that's sort of a symptom of the problem. Another issue might be people can be very scary to be around. You might feel like your opinions don't matter, or that everyone is more qualified than you are, and you're the dumbest person in the room. Sometimes people often feel like who am I to talk on this particular point? And that's often called the imposter syndrome, where you don't sort of validate your own experience. But ultimately, these all stem from the same core issue, which is we don't understand the value that we bring to the table as a student representative. So it helps to frame this question and ask, so why are we there? And what do we add to the conversation? And some of the things that you might not realize you add is firstly, and obviously, you add a connection to the student body. You interact with students all the time through classes, through clubs, through social media. You have a far better grasp on modern digital communication than most of the people in the committees will have, if they have a marketing person. You're far more adept at digital communication, at being involved with Facebook and social media and all that sort of thing. Another thing that you bring to the table is fresh ideas. You're all younger than all the other people in the committees, by and large, if it's a faculty committee. You've come from different backgrounds, you move in different circles to them. By the time people reach these sort of positions in faculty, often the people they interact with are the same, and the circles they move in are the same. And so that tends to close people's minds to a lot of ideas. And also, for the most part, most of the student reps I've met have been very open-minded people. You're willing to go out and seek out these sort of opportunities, and that tends to lead a sort of enthusiasm in the person. And the final and most important thing that you bring to the table in these committees is perspective. If you think about when your parents talk about being at school, and then it's just totally not representative of what your school experience was, that's what it's like for a lot of these professors. It's been maybe 40 years since they've been at university studying. So, and my supervisor wrote his thesis on a typewriter. And so these people, the people that you're interacting with, their experience of university is very different from yours. Yours is a lot more modern, a lot more digital than theirs was. And so as a result, they become a bit disconnected from the student experience. And that's the main key thing that you bring, is that you are that direct connection to the student experience. That's why we're there, to bring them back in the fold and say no, this is what it's actually like being a student now. Because otherwise they don't really have that. And the other thing that we bring is understanding of sort of the ethos of our generation. We know what our generation likes and wants to fight for and cares about. And that way you can help sort of stop making them doing really cringy things on social media and that sort of thing. So when you think about the problem like that, there's a couple of things you can do to try and fix these issues. The first thing would be to be interested in the content of the committee. So be there and take notes and try and be engaged if you can. And the other thing not to do is don't just join a committee for CV fodder, because you'll be miserable the entire time, I will guarantee it. Another thing you can do is to try and be prepared for each meeting. So reading the minutes beforehand and pre-planning questions that you might have based on what you're going to talk about is so much easier than trying to come up with something that doesn't sound silly on the spot, because it will always sound awkward and weird if you wing it. Another thing you do is just try and start small. So if you're having issues engaging with your committee or speaking up or feeling shy, try and just do one thing in a meeting. Maybe it'll be just discussing or bouncing back off somebody else's point, or yeah, just saying, oh, what about this? Something, it might not even be consequential. It doesn't have to be this huge groundbreaking discovery. It's just being in the conversation that's important, and avoiding being a spectator. And it's good to not wait to be heard, because the important thing is that you are in the conversation, and nobody's going to notice if you talk once or if you talk 3 or 4 or 5 times. It's just that you're there and you're participating. That's what people notice. Another thing you can do is take responsibility. So if people ask for someone to do something, or if somebody needs help with a task, then you can volunteer to do that. And that gets you involved in a way that isn't necessarily always verbal and doesn't necessarily put your ideas or your eloquence on the line. The other thing that I always like to think about is trying to understand the worst case scenario. So the worst case scenario, let's say you say something people don't agree with. That's not a bad thing. You've challenged them to assess their position on the topic. And debate is the reason we form committees, rather than just have some dictator established to decide all of TNL's perspectives on stuff, right? And the other thing is, like, what if you say something really dumb and get shut down? Next meeting, you're going to be the only person that remembers that. Everybody's way too busy and has way too much COVID stuff to worry about to remember that you said something stupid last meeting. And they see students do way dumber things in class all the time, and like jump in the lake and all sorts of ridiculous stuff like that, right? The other final thing is, if you feel like you're not being given the opportunity to speak, either through somebody shutting you down, or it feels a bit more targeted, and that at that point, I think it's an issue to raise with the committee chair, because there might be more serious issues at fault there, and it's not on you at that point. So I just want to leave off with a few final thoughts of, they want you to be there, and they want you to be engaged, and they want you to speak up. It means that they can do their job better, and their job is easier because you're there and you're helping them. And it's why they asked you to be on the committee. And at the end of the day, if you do embarrass yourself terribly, you'll probably never see them again anyway. And so, like, what does it really matter?
Thanks, James. All very true points, and very good points, I might add as well. So before we move into our next part of today's session, which will be our Q&A, and so we've got some fantastic questions lined up from you all already, from your form submissions, so thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions to raise about the presentations prior to us moving into this new section of the event? Okay, yes.
I have a question. It feels like sometimes going into meetings, decisions have already been made. So it's like you just get kind of passed through, and then it's kind of going off of what you said of like not knowing where to jump in. Because then towards the end, it's like, all right, anyone have anything to say? And I'm like, oh, but all these things have been said already. So like, have you already decided? Do you actually want input? Or like, that's something I'm not quite sure how to be like bold with. Because they're higher up in the rankings. So it's like, how do you give input in situations like that?
James, are you happy to address that one?
Yeah. You're right. Like, so they are often on a lot of committees, and so things get decided at places where you aren't. I think at the end of the day, the things that tend to get pushed through like that have to happen in that way in some form. The minutiae might be able to change, and that's sort of what you could be arguing for. But a lot of the time, if stuff's getting just like blasted through, that's because at a faculty level or higher, it has to be done. Okay. And those sort of topics, yeah, it can be really hard to weigh in on. But that doesn't mean it's not worth weighing in, because people miss things all the time. And so if it's something that you're like, oh, but what about this part of it? Or they might have missed some concept that is important, or some aspect of it that actually matters quite a lot, then they can always raise it at whatever high level committee that this decision was made on. Okay. And so you kind of have to like walk up the chain of command sometimes if things feel like they're already being decided.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, can I just add on to that?
Could I add to that quickly?
Yeah, you go, James.
Sorry, because I'm just in the same committee as Elizabeth, and sometimes it feels like, yeah, because we are the minority, a lot of the discussion is about the workplace rather than students, and then we keep running out of time. And then it's like we're well over by the time the meeting is meant to finish, and then you don't want to kind of open up a whole nother can of student stuff at the end when everyone has to go to another meeting. So it feels a little bit like maybe we should bring it in earlier, but just don't know when.
I'll just jump in quickly here, Critty, before. If that's the case, then I would, at the end of that meeting, say, or at least together say, we've got an agenda item we'd like to raise, and then have it added to the agenda for the next meeting. Because that's the way the sort of structure will always work. If it's not an agenda item on the meeting, then it might not get done. And so I think if you put it in, it's in there, and they know they're going to be talking about it, and that way it's hard to just breeze past it.
Yeah, the last meeting we had so much that we didn't really get to get through everything before everyone had to go on to the next meeting. So actually quite a few agenda items, including some of the student stuff that we missed. But yeah, as a minority, you feel like what they're discussing is more relevant to the majority in the committee, at least anyway. But not to say that it's any more important than something a student might raise. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky thing trying to know when to actually bring something up, or because you're obviously following the agenda from top to bottom, and then you run out of time about 70% of the way through, and then you haven't reached the student stuff yet, or at least that's what happened to us last time. So yeah.
As we've seen in recent times, the minority is still a very important part of the society. So
yeah.
I think if it's consistently getting pushed off, then that's when you need to actually have a word to the chair or whoever is sort of emceeing the meeting and say, look, we haven't had a chance to talk about this for the last 2 meetings or something. Could we be earlier in the agenda so that we can just cover whatever topics we need to cover, and then we can move on to the other stuff? Because at that point, like if it's at the back, it's just going to keep getting pushed to the back.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think you might just need to request that it is earlier in the agenda so that it gets covered, and just be like, look, we haven't been able to have a say for a while. I understand the committee's busy, but we have to represent everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. That helps.
Sorry, can I just add on to that, because that's something that I definitely thought was challenging for me, the first one. So maybe just before, so like do you get like a call for agenda items before the meeting, James and Elizabeth? That do you want to add anything on the agenda or anything like that?
Do we get contacted, do you mean? Or
Yeah. Do you get like an email which says, do you want to add anything on the agenda? Please send it to us before whatever this date.
Yes, last time we had something sent to us, and then we filled it out. It was like a survey type thing, and I also sent through a like an article that I'd seen that I wanted to kind of have people take a look at and stuff, which was added to the end of the agenda, but we ran out of time. There was actually quite a lot of stuff that we didn't get around to speaking about, because people have back-to-back meetings in the workplace, whereas a student, we might have time afterwards, other people don't. And so as it hit that 1 o'clock mark, quite a few people left. And then obviously, without everybody there, it can be a bit difficult to continue the conversation. So yeah,
I just don't think that at the moment how UQ and how I think everybody in the world is working, it's not really good to push your thoughts to maybe like the next meeting, which can be a month or 2 down the line, and by then UQ would have completely changed all of their priorities. So I guess what worked for me was that we had something on the agenda item which was actually not our bit. It was something that the faculty wanted to know about, but we didn't get time to discuss it. But I reached out to other people, and I really wanted to share that feedback, but nobody got we just didn't have time to discuss it. So I sent a mail after the meeting to the secretary of the committee, and I was like, this is whatever I found, and since we didn't discuss it in the meeting, I've kind of sent it over to you if you can pass it on to the chairs and stuff. So I mean, she did that, and she did put it in the minutes of the meeting, and she added that this was a mailer, and because we didn't get to discuss it. So I mean, people essentially still kind of read it. So if you don't get a chance to speak in the meeting, I completely agree with everything that James said, that you need to kind of also speak up and get yourself just on the agenda early on. But if it doesn't happen, I mean, it's not like that the meeting's over and you really can't do anything. You can just still send an email to the secretary and just be like, this is something that I think is really important. I want everybody to look at it, kind of a thing.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
And I think also just from a staff perspective as well, having been in meetings, sorry, not to say that you guys haven't either, just in terms of our meetings and things like that. So, I mean, often it also will come up that, we might not have time for these agenda items. And then sometimes it is kind of worded as a vague question as is it okay if we skip over this today? Have you guys found that kind of wording has come up at all?
I think because of Zoom, because people are a little more pressed for time and things.
Yeah. Only because I'm thinking, if that wording does come up, just no, in the most polite way possible, just say, look, this actually, we've been working on this, we have some feedback to give, give us, even if you've been allocated a certain amount of minutes on the agenda, if you say, look, we'll do it in 2, at least that's also just some way that you can have something voiced. And you can even then be saying in the meeting as well, look, we'll follow this up with an email that is more in depth, but this is something you need to be aware of. Even if you just do it that way, you just give a brief, this is what it's about, what we wanted to discuss. It at least puts it on their radar. And so as Kriti was saying, then also when they do get that follow-up email, they think, okay, yes, that's what it was. This is what it's about. And then also I think potentially addressing it from a more human perspective as well after that meeting, as the guys have said, whether you address something with the secretary or the chair, just, I guess, add that human element to it, not so much be like, this is, something I wanted to address, I didn't get to do that. You can say, look, we're feeling not valued. We feel as though our opinion is not being heard because, as these guys were saying, they want you on the committees ultimately. They've done the recruitment to get you guys on the committees. And so if you address it from that way, a more human, personable kind of perspective, people might be more inclined to listen as well. That would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks for that. There has been no sense that we haven't been respected or anything, or haven't been given an opportunity. But just kind of because it's only the first or second meeting, just kind of trying to find out when to interject or how to maybe go about bringing something up if we're not feeling like things are getting heard. So definitely I'll be more prepared for the next one. And maybe Elizabeth and I can actually talk before then as well and get together and maybe present something as well, because there's obviously things that we probably want to talk about. So
yeah, definitely. All right. Well, that was a good discussion, guys. If you need anything further after this, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to have a chat with you further about anything that you guys might need in your committee as well.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. So let's move on to your Q&A questions. First. All right. This one was a big one with a lot of the submissions that we have. How can I pull more information out of my peers, particularly in this online environment? This one's a hard one. I think a lot of people at the moment, particularly students, feedback that we've been receiving even as staff members, a lot of people are experiencing Zoom fatigue. And so that is kind of an issue mixed in with always having to communicate online. So guys, as a panel, can we think of anything that is going to help that is a little bit outside of the norm or outside of what our regular practices would be in regards to engaging peers and getting their feedback as well?
Just in regards to the Zoom fatigue, maybe that we could have breaks every now and then, every hour, just take a 5-minute break, go and get a coffee, stretch your legs, go for a walk, maybe just duck outside and get some fresh air and then come back in, because then you go from one Zoom meeting to the next and you've spent 5 hours, in the same room, in the same seat. So yeah, maybe presenting that would be good.
Absolutely.
Something that my group of student reps have been doing, so I'm a student rep for the School of Biological Sciences, is we started a circle on the UQ's virtual village. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with it. And I don't know how well it might work for some of your committees, but we've been able to get at least some feedback and interaction with students through that. And I'm hoping that in the future we'll get more, but it's kind of been a bit iffy at the moment as the platform has been developed.
No, that's a good one that I actually haven't heard of before as well. And I believe the Village platform is going to be continuing in the future as well. So perhaps if that was a different option that you guys might want to explore, that will hopefully be there in the future for you to build off of as well. Further to this one as well, we have actually had some previous workshops in the past few weeks. One of them was eliciting and analysing student feedback, and it does touch on how you could do that in an online environment. So my plan was to also send you out a follow-up email that has these resources in it, so you can go view the slides as well as the accompanying resources for the workshop, and they were recorded as well, so those recordings will go up soon. So I think potentially that the resources that we've done in the used in the workshops previously might also help a little bit in regards to this. So I'll send you the follow-up email so that you guys can take a look at that as well. But does anyone have any further points to kind of add on this topic? I know this was a large pain point in terms of the submissions for everybody at the moment. No. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. I might just come back to this one because this one is also me talking. So, all right. So this one was, I'm having difficulty connecting with domestic students as I myself am an international student. As an international student rep, should I initiate any events or connective platforms just for international students of my cohort? And to what extent should I initiate?
Maybe I can have a go here because I did feel like that at the start of my kind of experience as a student rep. I think you do have to kind of acknowledge that it is going to be difficult, and especially in the virtual world, it's definitely even more difficult because the students that you would otherwise meet in class, you're essentially not even meeting them as well. So one thing that I did was I had a couple of professors who I think were pretty open, and I wrote a mail to them and I said, you know, that I'm a student rep and everything, but I'm not able to connect with, you know, cohorts that other than mine. So other than like whatever I was studying, I was really not able to connect with them. So do you mind if you can put like a small message out on the other classes that you take, other courses that you take, which are in the postgrad space? So they said they were very happy to. They just wanted me to write like 10 words to it, and I gave it to them and they put it on their blackboard. So I mean, that kind of showed that one thing. And the other thing that I did is that in my tutorials, I asked again a couple of my tutors to really just let me get 5 minutes at the start of the tutor and at the tutor, and just say, you know, that I exist and this is what I do. So if there's anything that you really want to speak about, I'm happy to chat. This is my number, this is my email ID. And it just, I had like a couple of students who did end up calling me and who did end up saying that, you know, this is what we feel, but we don't really know where to go, kind of a thing, and all of that. So I would not say that this is just the only way that it can be done, but I definitely think this is a way that really helped me personally. And I did have a couple of domestic students that I was working on projects with last semester. And I just messaged them and I said, you know, this is my role this semester. So can you get me some feedback from your kind of cohort and your friends and all of that? And they were really helpful. So I had like, you know, like how international students also have the different kind of subcultures. So I reached out to a couple of them, to like about 3-4 of them in every kind of cohort. And I said, you know, I'm doing this role, but I'm a little lost. Do you want to help me get some kind of feedback on? So I mean, that kind of grouping did help in a way because they reached out to their peers and got me that feedback. Otherwise, I don't know how I would have really managed to get a larger kind of perspective on things. So maybe just reaching out to whoever you worked with in the past, or you know, done some projects with them, or you know, somebody that you see is very I actually reached out to somebody who was very active on LinkedIn, and I said, you know, this is my role, so get me feedback from your community, kind of a thing. So it was just these are just like things that you have to kind of figure out where they can kind of lie for you. But yeah, it definitely does help. I think social media is a pretty good start in general.
No, that's perfect. Does anyone, obviously these are all anonymous on this slide, but, you know, hopefully that might answer the question. If, you know, any of these answers aren't necessarily answering what you had originally written on the form, or we've interpreted it a different way, feel free to just pop in the chat and we're happy to, you know, continue talking about the answers and having a discussion with you as well. But if no one has anything else, I'll move on to the next one. I thought this one was an interesting one. How can we connect to the students when we aren't given any real positions or a way to connect with them? And I thought it was interesting because of the part about when we're not given any real positions. Feel free to chime in if you might think that this is relevant to you in some way as well. It's a hard one, I think, personally. How have you guys actually felt that you had value in your positions? I think is a good question for everybody. Anyone?
Well, just like starting on a micro level, I have, because I'm on the EDI committee, with inclusion. So I have friends at the university that also have needs where they need to be included, like they have disabilities. So just when everything with Zoom came up, we were just discussing like where we're struggling with it and what's happening. So I felt like, but that's only people that are that I know that are in a similar position that I'm in. So it's a very small group of people, but that's really the only way I've been able to connect with them, not so much like the larger student body or the larger cohort within my faculty.
And have you felt, just in regards to the, being given any real positions, perhaps that might also come down to understanding your role as a student rep and what its potential could be? Because I think, obviously, as was mentioned before, in a meeting room, it could potentially feel as if your position doesn't hold any real value, or if your agenda items are being overlooked, perhaps you it doesn't feel like a real position if that's the case. So are there any, I guess, ideas that we could have for this student as to how they could feel more connected with their position? Or is it a matter of them themselves having to be more proactive and involved, or reviewing the resources?
Just to chime in here, I think there's sort of two parts to this. It's true that the faculty doesn't really provide you with any platform to connect with the students. They sort of assume that you are the platform, if that makes sense. So either through your social media activity, you connect with enough of them, or you could start something. Most faculties, committees I've been in don't have a pre-existing social media presence. That's something that you could establish. Sometimes establishing just a page that represents your committee, and you just have a box that says like, you can submit questions here. And sometimes that's enough, because the reality is that the faculty members that are hiring you as a student representative assume that you represent the student body interests. They don't assume that you solicit ideas from the student body. They just assume that you as a student represent the interests of other students. And like, that's their perspective on it. And so in a way, depending on what the committee is, obviously, in a way, you don't necessarily have to go and ask everybody in the student body's opinion on any given thing. It's just that by being a student, you represent student interests. And theoretically, you would do things that benefit students, not just yourself, or that actively don't benefit students. And so you don't necessarily need to go out and petition people in the street for their opinion on stuff.
I think it's with Elizabeth, we're in the Faculty of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion. So we feel that we really do need to go out and actually speak to people and get like a very broad response, which has been really difficult during COVID, because it happened at the beginning of the semester and we haven't had an opportunity to really talk to people more broadly, or beyond the group that we kind of study with at university as it is. So yeah, we want to make sure that everyone is being treated equitably and like fairly, but we're trying to like find ways that we can actually reach out and talk to people, because it's a little bit difficult as well when you do like a self-survey and it might be like quantifiable, but you really want that qualitative stuff, where you like actually talk to people and understand the situation that they might have been through. And just what Elizabeth was saying, when people are immunosuppressed or from an international location and they're here during COVID, and then they might not have, like I had a friend who was immunosuppressed, but she was from Norway and she didn't have a lot of essentials for herself prior to COVID, and she didn't know where to buy those essentials. And then she was overwhelmed with university, and then she's dropped off the radar to my messages, and all I can do is try and contact her via technology, and I haven't been able to reach her. So it's been difficult in our committee. I'm not sure how it goes so much with other people, but I don't feel like my opinion is necessarily a representation of equity across the cohort when there's hundreds of people.
I think what might be a good idea for you guys, which I think, was it Anna mentioned previously, might actually be looking at the virtual village.
Really good for that.
Yeah,
because they've got.
Sorry, you go.
So I was going to say, I don't know if you've heard of it or looked at it, but there's circles that are looking at, say, like people on the spectrum who are dealing with isolation. Then they've got just general things like, I don't know, like baking circles and things like that. But if you go and join a lot of groups like that, then you can see what people are talking about and what is like high priority for them. So that might give you that diversity that you're missing at the moment.
Okay, so it was the virtual village, was it?
Yeah, I'll send through a link to you guys as well as some resources. So have a look at that. And especially when people are signing up, they're also highlighting their interests and things like that as well, and actually creates a compatibility for you and other people in the village. So people that are interested in what you are, you might be able to connect with them as well. I'll just move along now as I'm cognizant of time. I might pop back to the question that I jumped over, which is, what should I do if I receive complaints from students? So essentially, I think first and foremost, it's okay to acknowledge when you don't know the answer to something. You know, as a student rep, even though someone might identify you as the source of information or the go-to contact point, it's okay to admit that you might actually not know the answer there and then. I mean, we have to do this every day. I do this all the time at work anyways, but I think giving them and instilling confidence in yourself as well as them, that doesn't make much sense, but the fact that you're going to find the information for them is probably what is really important here. So I think in the first instance, if you are receiving a complaint, find out amongst the cohort of students, if you can, if there are any general themes that are trending. So if it's going to become a wider kind of complaint that you could potentially address in your committee, depending on what your committee is and what improvements they look at making for the student body, that could be a good place for you to first collect that general data and then bring that to your committee. If it's not something that is particularly relevant to your committee, but you have a connection with a different student rep who sits on a committee, feel free to work with them and, you know, gather that feedback and then provide it to the relevant source. However, there is also a different option in terms of what you can do with that feedback, and that's also there's a grievance procedure that you can have a look into. So let me just, how do I exit out of this one? Oh gosh, why am I so bad with tech?
You're chairing and you're talking at the same time.
Yeah, Aileen was actually involved in the grievance process. So I might hand over to her just to quickly chat about how that works a little bit.
Hey guys, first of all, just some amazing insights from you all. And I wish every academic staff member could hear from the voice of students. It's absolutely right. Some of us have been around for hundreds of years and I actually am one of these people that went to uni on a typewriter. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying. Now, I'm from student services, but I actually spent a good portion of my life at Melbourne Uni in the student grievance area and also a bit of a project space here for UQ. Fundamentally, we'll supply all these links to you, but the first port of call is the student policies and procedures. I know it's boring, but they're the ground rules. So ultimately, I'd refer you to have a look at section 3.6002. We'll put all the links in here. Fundamentally, there's a formal process for student grievances, both informally and formally. There's a difference between academic grievances, as in I don't like my grades, or what we call protected attributes, harassment, bullying, any of those, racism, any of those type of things. The policy and procedure is useful because there's a table, and the table actually says I've got this type of grievance and this is who will hear it, and these are the appeal processes. UQ has an online de-identified protected form that goes directly to the unit under the Office of the Academic Registrar. Again, we'll make those links available, but it asks you to explain what the issue is, what attempts you've made to resolve the issue, if appropriate. Obviously in harassment, you wouldn't approach the perpetrator, all those sorts of things. There's an appeal process that goes directly to Senate, and there's also external support. So things like the Queensland Ombudsman, they hear complaints around procedural compliance and fairness, not on academic judgment. And the other point I would make is that obviously raising it with the person, if it's a committee member, if it's something to do with how you've been treated or how you experienced something, I would strongly support getting the student union involved, because they have an advocacy arm. So whilst student services, we would supply support in terms of professional psychological support and social work type support, we don't supply advocacy services. So that basically is a bit of a cook's tour around the complaint system, and I'm happy to take any questions or talk to people offline about it. But yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Aileen. That is super helpful. So I'm just aware of time, guys. So what I might actually do, we have actually answered pretty much most of the other questions that were in our Q&A anyways. So barriers for rep-to-rep networking, I think Kriti covered on that roughly in her presentation. Opinions in the boardroom and stage fright, I think James, and we had a really good discussion surrounding that. Expectations of student reps on committees in light of the current online environment. I think that's going to be dependent on each committee, but I think also there is a level of understanding amongst the staffing community at the moment that people are not going to be, you know, as efficient as what they might usually be in their roles. That's just a very brief answer to that. I'm happy to address this in the follow-up email as well. But does anyone have any other questions or anything like that at the moment? Because otherwise I'll pass it back to the reps just to quickly summarize some of their tips and tricks, and then we'll let you all go. No.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got a bit of a specific one, so I'll try and keep it short. This is for Sean, which, hello, long time no see, man. He and I both do physics. You're also a Board of Studies rep, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, because I didn't put it in the questions because I wasn't too sure. There would be other Board of Studies reps because we feel a bit rare. How have you navigated getting student feedback, if any at all, regarding PA2? I mean, I'm assuming that's probably a fairly big topic in your board, but obviously there's a lot of things that aren't decided on it, and there's a decent amount of secrecy with it. I was just wondering if you'd had any luck navigating that or communicating any of that.
Yeah, so with PA2's consumed pretty much 95% of our board's meetings this year.
Yeah.
So it's been quite intense. I think the discussion that Kriti and James were having before about things, and Elizabeth and James as well, about things being pre-decided and feeling like topics are already considered. It's just kind of ticking them off the list. That's been a general theme for our Board of Studies meetings so far, just because of PA2. I feel like because a lot of the changes that I think the student reps on Board of Studies have been asked to voice their opinions on have been quite like minor wording kind of things in terms of the new program rules and stuff like that. It hasn't really been a big opportunity for us to go out into the student community and ask particular questions. The only way I've found that I can get feedback about PA2 as quickly as possible back into Board of Studies is to work with the Sloki team. So within the Faculty of Science, we meet regularly. There's a team of about 13 of us. We're all students. And I discuss some of the topics that are most important because they've all been briefed on PA2 and what it means for Faculty of Science. And then I find out from them. So I'm kind of lucky to have that pool of peers that know kind of what's going on and then how they feel about certain issues. But yeah, it's just been through Sloki.
Yeah, I'm not sure if HASS says something similar, but I might look into communicating with other student reps then. Sean, would you be amenable to maybe either after this or I'll get in touch with you, email, just talking some more Board of Studies stuff?
Sounds great. Yeah,
Fantastic.
Feel free to send me an email. That's all good.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Was there anything else, guys, before we move on to the final tips and tricks summary slide? Nope. All right, cool. All right, my fantastic rep facilitators, feel free to take it away.
Okay, I can start us off if you like. So my tips and tricks are the orange ones, I believe. So the points that I just tried to raise were some of the ones that have already been discussed today, but I feel like they're really important. So that's the two biggest ones for me are, as James said before, make sure to push yourself to ask questions during meetings. Just make small steps and eventually you become better known to your fellow committee members and you'll become more included. And so that's a big step. So your voice is an essential part of keeping the committee on track. So remember that you do bring different things to the table that other committee members don't. And my other point, very quickly, was to be sure to build a strong working relationship with the secretary. The secretary is your main advocate when you join a committee. They're the person that controls, well, in collaboration with the chair, controls the agenda of the meeting. They're the one that you can really talk to try and understand some of the finer details of the things that your committee is working on. And they should be your first port of call with any questions you have about committee business.
Great, I can go next. I thought whatever Sean said was really, really valid. But I just feel one thing that we all should kind of remember is that voice your opinion even when you think it's not, even if you think your idea is not super developed and you're not really sure what will be the outcome, just kind of voice it and see where it goes, because somebody else might be thinking on those lines and it can result in a larger discussion and a more cohesive outcome to that. So just voice your opinion even if it's not fully baked, and that's going to be fine. Nobody's really, like James mentioned, nobody's really going to remember if you put your foot in your mouth, so that's fine. And also just try and avoid groupthink. Like I am very cognizant of my issues of groupthink with international students in my cohort, so just try and avoid that, because when you do present to the committee, it just shows if you have really spoken to a really large diverse group of people. And I think that was discussed earlier as well. So it's really good to reach out to a larger kind of cohort if your committee is looking at feedback from the students. And I think the last thing is that if you need help, I mean, there's enough and more people around who can really help you, so just ask. This was really, really helpful, Cal and team Simon. If we have regular kind of meetings like these, that's going to be a really good outlet to just ask for whatever that you're facing trouble with. Yep. Over to James.
Thanks. And mine are the purple or blue, whatever color that is.
Yep.
So my two things were use the connections you make through being a rep to expand your professional network. So because you're always going to be the lowest rung on the ladder, that means there's a lot of people who might be able to give you a job. So it's not a bad idea to ask them if they have any connections. Say, this is what I'm interested in. Do you know anyone that I could meet? And a lot of the time, you just chain through people and you meet people through other people, and then you end up finding opportunities through there. And it's so much easier than just going out and or asking some random person whether you can hang out, because they know that you're not a total psycho because they came from this other person they know. And the other thing is, if an opportunity presents itself, it's a good idea to say yes, because a lot of the time I noticed that once I'd been a rep on a committee or two, then all of these other people are like, oh, come and do this, or come and talk to us about being a student rep and that sort of thing. like it can lead to a lot more opportunity than you would think from quite a small start.
All right, perfect. These are the resources that I'm going to be sending you guys out in the follow-up email. And so these are all the people that presented. As well, Aileen has just popped a note in the chat for me to introduce Courtney to you all. So I didn't actually introduce myself either. So I'm a project officer in the student staff partnership space, working on the rep and voice side of things. And Courtney is one of our new project coordinators as well. So if you guys need any help in terms of anything rep, voice isn't running at the moment, but anything in the rep space and you email the SSP email, Courtney or myself will be more than happy to help you guys. So thank you so much. I'm sorry that we went a little bit over time, but I will send you out all the follow-up resources. If you have any time as well, we would really appreciate it if you could fill out this short survey just down the bottom here. It will help us to continue creating events like this. And definitely, as this was supposed to be a series, we would love to hear if you actually had found it worthwhile, because we would love to talk to some other faculties and areas next, just to get their perspectives on things and what their best practices and tips and tricks and things have been within their individual committees and faculties and things like that. So that being said, you're all free to go. Thanks so much. I'll stick around in case you have any further questions or anything like that.
Oh yeah, Cal?
Yeah.
Could you post the link in the chat, because you can't click on it through screen share?
Damn. Yes. Actually, I'll send it in the follow-up email because I don't actually have it open right now.
Yeah.
Thank you.